Don't sit down. 3 words, whispered across a diner counter at 2:17 in the morning by a woman nobody had ever paid attention to a man everyone in town was afraid of. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what she was walking into. She only knew that if she stayed silent, a man was going to die before his coffee got cold. Nobody expected a waitress to save a Hell's Angel, but Emily Carter did. And what happened next, nobody expected that either. Chia. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Emily Carter had not planned on working the overnight shift on a Tuesday. She had planned on calling in. She had planned on telling her manager Dale that her back hurt, which it did because it always did after double shifts, and that she needed one night to just lie flat on her bed and stare at the ceiling and breathe. She had planned on a lot of things that never happened. But Dale had called her at 11 that night, voice tight and already apologetic, saying that Macy had called out sick again and that there was nobody else. And Emily had stood in her kitchen, holding the phone, looking at the pile of bills on her counter that she had been rearranging but not paying for 3 weeks, and she had said, "Fine, I'll be there by midnight." That was how Emily Carter ended up behind the counter of the Red Creek Road Stop Diner at 2:17 in the morning. That was how she ended up saving a man's life. And that was how her entire world cracked open. The Red Creek Road Stop sat on the edge of a 2-lane highway about 4 miles outside of Red Creek, Colorado. It was the kind of place that existed because people needed somewhere to stop, not because anyone actually wanted to be there. The booths had duct tape on the corners. The coffee was burnt by 9 at night, and nobody bothered to make a fresh pot because the overnight crowd never complained. The neon sign outside had been missing the O in open for 6 years, and nobody had fixed it. Emily had worked there for 3 years. 3 years of midnight to 8. 3 years of truck drivers who didn't leave tips, and teenagers who came in after the bars closed, and old men who nursed coffee until sunrise because they couldn't sleep at home anymore. 3 years of learning to read people the way you read weather, not because it was interesting, but because it kept you safe. She was not a woman who had been given many advantages in life. She was 41 years old, divorced, no children, a bad knee from a car accident 7 years back, and a savings account that would have been embarrassing if she had let herself think about it too long. She was not beautiful in the way magazines told women they should be beautiful. She was medium height, brown hair. She kept in a braid when she worked, and hands that were rough from years of carrying plates and cleaning counters and doing the kind of work that leaves marks on you. But Emily Carter had something that most people in Red Creek underestimated. She paid attention. She always had, growing up the way she did, a father who drank too much and a mother who disappeared into herself when things got hard. Emily had learned early that survival depended on reading the room before the room read you. She knew when a customer was about to get mean. She knew when 2 people at different tables were connected to each other and pretending they weren't. She knew the difference between someone who was tired and someone who was afraid. That Tuesday night, just after 2 in the morning, she knew something was wrong before she could explain why. The diner had 3 customers when the door opened the first time. A trucker named Pete, who Emily knew by face and order, black coffee, 2 eggs over easy wheat toast, never a full conversation. An older woman sitting in the far corner booth who had come in around midnight with a small suitcase and had been nursing a hot tea ever since, like she was waiting for a bus that might not come. And a young man at the counter, maybe 22, wearing a university hoodie and earbuds, scrolling his phone, who had ordered a cheeseburger and eaten it in 4 bites and then sat there because he clearly had nowhere to be. When the door opened, Emily was refilling Pete's coffee. She looked up automatically. That was habit. You always looked at the door. 3 men walked in. They were not particularly large. They were not dressed unusually. They wore jeans and dark jackets, and one of them had on a baseball cap pulled low, and the other 2 had close-cropped hair, and the kind of faces that didn't give you anything to read. They looked, in other words, perfectly ordinary, except Emily had learned a long time ago that perfectly ordinary was sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world. The 3 men came in and looked around the diner the way people look around a place when they are checking it rather than entering it. There was a difference. Regular customers look for an open booth or a friendly face. These men looked at the exits. They looked at the corners. The one in the baseball cap looked at Pete, dismissed him, looked at the woman in the corner, dismissed her, looked at the young man at the counter, dismissed him. And then the three of them chose a booth in the middle of the diner where they could see the entire room. They sat down and did not pick up menus. Emily walked over with 3 glasses of water. Evening, and she said, "Can I get you gentlemen started with something?" The one in the baseball cap looked at her. "Coffee," he said, 3 cups. "Sure thing." She smiled the way she smiled 1,000 times a night, automatic professional, the smile that meant nothing and cost nothing. Anything to eat. "We're waiting for someone," said the man to his left. His voice was flat, not unfriendly exactly, just flat, like a voice that had practiced not giving anything away. "Take your time," Emily said. She went behind the counter and started the coffee, and she watched them. Not obviously. She had perfected over 3 years the art of watching people without appearing to watch them. She wiped the counter. She restocked the napkin holders. She checked the pie case and pretended to be making a decision about something. And she watched. The 3 men did not talk to each other much. That was the first thing. People waiting for a friend talk. They checked their phones, they joked, they looked toward the door with anticipation. These men sat with a stillness that was not comfortable or relaxed. It was the stillness of people who were ready for something. The baseball cap man had his hand on the table. His fingers were spread flat, and Emily noticed because she noticed things that the way his hand was positioned, it could reach inside his jacket in about 1 second. Her stomach went cold. She poured the 3 coffees slowly. She was carrying the coffees to their table when the door opened again. Jack Holloway walked through it like a man who had been walking through doors his whole life and didn't think anything of it. I was 63 years old, though he wore it like it was 63 miles instead of years, like the road had been laid down on him instead of behind him. Gray beard thick and trimmed close, a leather vest over a dark thermal shirt. His hair was pulled back, silver streaked, and there was a scar across his left jaw that he had never explained to anyone in Red Creek, because nobody had ever been bold enough to ask. He had the calloused hands of a man who worked with them and the eyes of a man who had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. In Red Creek, people knew 2 things about Jack Raven Holloway. He was the president of the local Hells Angels chapter, and you gave him space. Not because he was violent, he had not in fact been in serious legal trouble in over 12 years, a fact that the county sheriff knew and occasionally found inconvenient, but because Jack carried something around him that made people instinctively step back. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling you get standing at the edge of something very deep. Respect mixed with a healthy awareness of distance. Emily had served Jack before, maybe 8-10 times over the years. He was always polite, always left a decent tip, never gave her any trouble. She had never had a real conversation with him beyond the usual, "What do you want here?" "It is. Have a good night." She had no particular feelings about him one way or the other. What she did have the moment Jack walked through the door was a feeling she could not have named if she tried. Because Jack came through the door, easy and relaxed the way he always did, and the 3 men at the booth went still in a way they had not been still before. It was a different stillness. It was a targeted stillness. Emily set 2 of the coffees down on the booth table without looking at the men and turned toward the counter. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. Inside, something that lived in her chest, some old and animal part of her that had grown up in a house where you had to sense danger before it arrived, was screaming. Jack had settled onto a stool at the far end of the counter, away from the young man with the phone, and he was pulling off his gloves when Emily walked behind the counter and came toward him. "Evening," she said. Her voice did not shake. The usual. He looked up at her, faintly surprised that she remembered. "Sure," he said. "Thanks." She turned to pour him a coffee. And in the glass of the coffee maker's chrome surface, distorted and imperfect but visible, she could see the reflection of the 3 men's booth. The one in the baseball cap was looking at Jack's back. He said something to the man on his left. The man on his left nodded. The 3rd man shifted in his seat in the way a man shifts when he is about to stand up. Emily's heart slammed once hard against her ribs. She had less than 30 seconds to decide. She thought in that sliver of time about all the reasons to do nothing. She did not know Jack Holloway. Not really. She did not know what those men wanted, not for certain. She could be wrong. She had been wrong before. If she was wrong, she would look like a lunatic in front of a man who ran a biker gang and probably had a very short tolerance for lunatics. If she was right and she said something, those men would see her say it. She thought about the message she had not received yet, the one that would come 12 hours later left on her kitchen table by people who had been inside her apartment. She thought about that message, even though she didn't know it was coming. She thought about being 11 years old in a house where all the wrong decisions were made by people who stayed quiet because they were afraid of consequences, and how those quiet decisions had left marks on her that never fully healed. She picked up the coffee mug. She walked to Jack. She set the mug down in front of him. She leaned in close enough that nobody across the diner could see her lips. And she said very quietly, her voice absolutely steady, "Don't sit down. Don't reach for the cup. Those three men in the middle booth have been watching the door since they came in, and one of them looks like he's about to stand up. I don't know what this is, but I'm telling you what I see." Jack did not react. Not with his face, not with his body, not even with his hands, which were still resting flat on the counter. But his eyes changed. The casual ease in them, the comfortable road-worn calm went somewhere else. What replaced it was something Emily had seen only a few times in her life, in people who had been in real danger and knew how to operate inside it. Clarity, pure, cold-focused clarity. He looked down at his coffee mug. He said so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "How many?" "Three," as she said. "Middle booth, baseball cap, blue jacket, black jacket." "You sure about this?" She had asked herself the same question about 4 seconds ago. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm not sure." A pause. "Which way's the back door?" "Left of the kitchen, goes to the parking lot." Jack nodded once, the smallest nod she had ever seen. "I'm going to stand up now and use the restroom," he said. "If I don't come back, call 911. You got a name, Emily." "Emily," he said her name like he was pressing it into his memory. "Don't let them see your face change." He stood up from the stool in one easy motion, like a man who was just stretching his legs, and walked toward the back of the diner. Emily turned back to the counter. She picked up a cloth and started wiping down surfaces. Her hands were shaking so badly she folded the cloth around them to hide it. The next 4 minutes were the longest of her life. She did not look at the booth. She did not look at the back hallway. She cleaned the counter. She refilled Pete's coffee without being asked. And Pete said, "Thanks, hun," without looking up from his phone, and Emily smiled and said, "Of course." And inside, she was calculating distances and thinking about where her own phone was and whether she could dial without being seen. At minute 2, the baseball cap man turned in his seat and looked toward the hallway where Jack had gone. Emily watched this from the corner of her eye. At minute 3, he said something to the man beside him. His voice was low, but the diner was quiet, and Emily had spent 3 years learning to hear things at a diner counter. "He's been gone too long. Give it a minute. Something's off. Give it a..." "I said something's off, Danny." A short silence, a scraping of boots on floor. Emily heard it before she saw it, the sound of someone standing up in a booth. She turned around just enough and said in her best "nothing is wrong" waitress voice, "Can I get you gentlemen anything else? We've got fresh pie, just brought it out 20 minutes ago." The baseball cap man looked at her. Emily met his gaze. She kept her face politely, professionally, absolutely neutral. The art of invisibility, she had learned a long time ago, was not about making yourself small. It was about making yourself expected. She was a waitress asking about pie at 2 in the morning. She was the most boring, predictable, irrelevant thing in the room. She watched him decide this. She watched him look past her toward the hallway one more time. "No," he said. "Thanks." She nodded and turned back to the counter. 30 seconds later, she heard the three of them get up. She heard the door open. She heard it close. She stood very still for a full 10 seconds, her hands flat on the counter, breathing. Then she walked to the back hallway and knocked on the wall beside the restroom. "They're gone," she said, a pause. Then Jack Holloway stepped out of the shadow beside the kitchen entrance. Not the restroom. She noticed he had never gone to the restroom, and he looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. It was not what she had expected him to say. 3 years, she said. He nodded slowly. "I've been in here a dozen times. I know, I never noticed you," he said, not unkindly, just honestly. "People don't," she said. "I know that too." Something shifted in his expression. A small thing. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "I need to make a call," he said. "And I need to know, did they see you warn me?" Emily thought about it. "I don't know for certain. I don't think so." "You don't think so?" he repeated. "The one in the baseball cap," she said carefully, "was watching the hallway. but I was already behind the counter when you walked back. I don't think he connected us." Jack studied her for a moment. "You pay attention," he said. "It kept me alive growing up," Emily said before she could stop herself. Then she pressed her mouth shut, embarrassed. But Jack didn't look at her with pity or curiosity. He looked at her like she had said something he understood. "Me too," he said quietly. Time muttered his call outside, standing in the parking lot in the cold, and Emily could see him through the diner window, just a shape, a man with his phone to his ear, talking without moving. She cleared the booth where the three men had been sitting. She picked up their untouched coffee cups. And she noticed, because she noticed things, that one of the men had left something on the inside edge of the booth seat tucked against the wall. Small, dark, like it had been placed there deliberately, not left by accident. She did not touch it. She went back to the counter and dialed the county sheriff's non-emergency line. She told them what she had seen in the most factual, undramatic voice she could manage. The woman on the other end of the line said someone would come by in the morning to take a look. Emily hung up and stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had just stepped into. Jack came back inside 20 minutes later. Two other men had arrived with him. By then, she hadn't seen them come in, hadn't heard cars. But suddenly there were two more men in the diner, both wearing Hell's Angels patches, both moving through the space with the careful, controlled energy of people who were working, not relaxing. One of them went directly to the booth and crouched down to look at what had been left in the seat without touching it. "Emily," Jack said, approaching the counter. She looked at him. "This is going to complicate your night," he said. "It's already pretty complicated," she said. The faintest trace of something, not quite a smile, but close, moved through his expression. "That thing in the booth," he said. "We're going to need to handle that. Some people are coming. Sheriff's going to want to talk to you." He paused. "I want to tell you something first." She waited. "What you did tonight," he said. "You didn't know me. You had no reason to say a word. You could have cleaned your counter and looked the other way, and nothing would have happened to you." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I thought about that," she said honestly. "I know you did. I still knew I couldn't." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" It was a simple question. It deserved a simple answer. Emily thought about her father. She thought about all the nights someone should have stepped in and didn't. She thought about being invisible for so long that it had become a kind of skill, and how sometimes skills that protect you become the very things that imprison you. "Because I know what it feels like," she said quietly, "when nobody shows up." Jack nodded. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to make sure someone shows up for you." Emily Carter didn't know, standing in that diner at 2:40 in the morning, what that promise actually meant. She didn't know about the hours ahead, or the message on her kitchen table, or the long months that would follow. She didn't know that her life had just pivoted on 3 words whispered over a coffee counter. She knew only that a man who frightened most people in Red Creek had looked at her, really looked at her, and said something nobody had said to her in a very long time. And that it landed in some part of her chest that had been hollow for longer than she wanted to admit. The sheriff's deputy arrived at 4 in the morning. By then, the older woman with the suitcase had finally gotten up, paid her bill, and walked back out into the dark toward wherever she was going. Pete had long since driven off. The young man with the earbuds had fallen asleep in his booth and had to be gently woken and guided out the door. The deputy's name was Terrence Webb. He was young, late 20s, with the slightly overwhelmed look of someone who had expected a quiet overnight shift. He did not look overwhelmed because of Jack Holloway, though she could see him working to appear relaxed about that. He looked overwhelmed because of what had been in the booth seat. Emily did not see exactly what it was. She caught a glimpse, something small and black, and the way the deputy held his phone up to photograph it before carefully bagging it said everything she needed to know about whether it was a coincidence that 3 men had left it in a specific spot where a specific person was supposed to sit. "Ms. Carter," Deputy Webb said, sitting across from her at the counter with a notepad, "can you walk me through what you observed, starting from when the 3 individuals entered the premises?" Emily walked him through it. She was precise. She was calm. She gave him descriptions: baseball cap, dark blue jacket, the flat voice, the specific way the hand had rested on the table near the inside of the jacket. She told him she had no proof of what they intended, only what she had observed. The deputy wrote it all down. He glanced once at Jack, who was standing at the end of the counter drinking coffee, like this was a perfectly ordinary situation, and then he looked back at Emily. You made the call to Mr. Holloway yourself, he said. I spoke to him, yes. And the three individuals departed before any confrontation occurred. Yes. You understand that depending on what we find here, you may be contacted as a witness. I understand. Deputy Webb looked at her for a moment longer than a routine witness interview required. Ms. Carter, he said, what made you say something? She looked at him. Young face, earnest eyes, genuinely curious. They were too still, she said. People who are just waiting are restless. These men were still the way things get still before they move fast. He wrote that down. Then he closed his notebook and said quietly, good call, ma'am. Dawn came in slow through the diner windows, the way it always did, gray. First, then the thin yellow beginning of light across the highway. Emily served the early morning trucker crowd on autopilot, hands moving through the routine of it without her brain being fully present. She made coffee and cracked eggs and called out orders and wiped down the counter and refilled the napkin holders and did all the things she always did. Before Jack left, he came to the counter one more time. He placed a 20 on the counter for the coffee he'd barely touched. I need to ask you something, he said. She looked up. You live alone? The question could have felt invasive. Coming from him in that quiet, steady voice, it felt like concern. Yes, she said. He nodded once. Don't go home alone this morning. Is there someone you can call? She thought about her list of people to call. It was shorter than she wanted it to be. I'll be fine, she said with a confidence she only halfway felt. Jack looked at her for a moment. You saved my life tonight, he said. That's not nothing. That's not something I forget. He slid a card across the counter, plain white, just a phone number handwritten on it. You need anything, anything at all, you call that number. Emily picked up the card. She turned it over in her fingers. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Jack Holloway said. He pulled on his gloves. He walked out of the Red Creek Road Stop Diner. And Emily Carter stood alone at the counter in the early morning light, holding a plain white card with a phone number on it, with the sound of the highway outside and the smell of burnt coffee in the air, and the very particular feeling of someone who has just crossed a line they cannot uncross. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know that when she got home at 8:15 that morning, her apartment door would be unlocked when she was sure she had locked it. She didn't know that the only thing missing was her sense of safety. She didn't know that the thing left behind on her kitchen table in a plain white envelope would have 3 words on it handwritten that would make every steady thing she had built in her quiet, invisible life suddenly feel like it was standing on nothing. She didn't know any of that yet. All she knew standing in that diner in the early light was that for the first time in 3 years of overnight shifts, something had happened that mattered. She had been seen, and she had chosen to be seen. What that cost her and what it would ultimately give her back was only just beginning. The envelope was sitting in the center of her kitchen table. Emily saw it the second she stepped through her apartment door at 8:17 that morning. She saw it before she saw anything else, before she saw that the chair by the window had been moved 3 inches from where she always kept it, before she noticed the faint smell of something that wasn't her apartment's usual smell, before she registered that the deadbolt she was absolutely certain she had locked when she left for work at 11 the previous night was sitting in the unlocked position. She saw the envelope first. White, plain, no name on it. She stood in the doorway for 4 full seconds without moving. The key was still in her hand. The door was still open behind her. Some part of her, the part that had grown up learning to read a room before stepping fully into it, held her exactly at the threshold, 1 foot in and 1 foot out, while the rest of her brain caught up with what her instincts already knew. Someone had been in her apartment. Someone had been in her apartment, and they had left something for her to find, and they had left without taking anything, which was so much worse than stealing. She stepped back into the hallway. She pulled the door almost closed without latching it. She took out her phone and stood in the hallway with her back against the wall and called the number on the plain white card Jack Holloway had slid across the diner counter 6 hours ago. It rang twice. Yeah, his voice was alert, not groggy, like he hadn't slept either. It's Emily Carter, she said. From the diner. A beat of silence. What happened? Someone was in my apartment. She kept her voice level. She was proud of that. While I was at work, there's an envelope on my kitchen table. I haven't touched it. A pause. She could hear something in the background voices, movement. Are you inside? I'm in the hallway. Good. Stay there. Don't go back in. Give me your address. She gave it. 15 minutes, he said, and hung up. Emily lowered the phone. She sat down on the hallway floor with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up, and she stared at the opposite wall and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way she had taught herself to breathe when she was 12 years old, and the walls of the house she grew up in felt like they were getting smaller. 15 minutes, she told herself. She could do 15 minutes. It was 11 minutes. She heard the footsteps on the stairs before she saw anyone, and she was on her feet by the time Jack came around the landing with two men behind him. One of them she recognized from the diner in the early morning hours, thick-built dark jacket, who had crouched by the booth and photographed what was left there. The other was younger, maybe 30, red-haired, with the focused expression of someone running calculations in his head. Jack looked at her the way he had looked at her in the diner, quickly, comprehensively checking for damage. "You're okay," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an assessment. "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't go inside. I called you from the hallway." He nodded. "Marcus." He said it to the thick-built man who moved past Emily toward her apartment door and pushed it open with two fingers and went in without hesitation, the way someone goes into a space they've cleared 100 times. Emily watched from the doorway. Marcus moved through her apartment with a methodical efficiency that was almost strange to watch. Not frantic, not cautious, just deliberate. He looked in the bathroom, opened the closet, checked behind the bedroom door. He came back in under 2 minutes. "Clear," he said. "Nobody here." Jack looked at Emily. "The envelope." "Still on the table," she said. "I didn't touch it." "Show me." They went inside together. The red-haired man, she hadn't been given his name, stayed in the hallway. Emily walked to the kitchen table and stopped a few feet from the envelope and pointed at it. Jack leaned in and looked at it without touching it. Then he looked at the table, the chair, the window. He looked at the door from the inside, studying the lock. "No sign of force," Marcus said from behind them. "They picked it," Jack said quietly. Not surprised, almost tired. He looked at Emily. "Do you have a landlord who has a key?" "My landlord is 78 and lives in Phoenix," she said. "He hasn't been here in 2 years." Anyone else, she thought. "My neighbor, Mrs. Petrov, has one for emergencies. She's 81 and doesn't drive." Nobody else. Nobody else. Jack straightened. He pulled out a pair of thin gloves from his jacket pocket, the kind you'd use for mechanical work, and opened the envelope. He read what was inside. His expression didn't change much, but something in his jaw tightened in a way Emily had not seen before. He handed the paper to her. 3 words, written in blocky, deliberate capital letters like someone pressing very hard with a pen. "You should have stayed invisible." Emily read it twice. She handed it back. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady. She did not know how it was steady. "What does that mean?" Jack looked at her. "It means they saw you warn me," he said. The cold came back, then the same cold she had felt in the diner when the baseball cap man's hand rested near his jacket, except this time it was inside her, not outside. "You said it was possible," he said. He wasn't blaming her. He wasn't anything except honest. "I know. They didn't confront you at the diner because there were witnesses and they weren't prepared for the situation to go the way it did." He paused. "This is them telling you they know who you are, where you live, and that they want me to be scared," Emily said. "Yes." "Well," she sat down on one of her kitchen chairs because her legs had finally stopped cooperating. "It's working." No. She did not go to sleep that morning. She sat in her own kitchen and answered questions from Jack, from Marcus, and eventually from Deputy Terrence Webb, who arrived with a small evidence bag and the same slightly overwhelmed expression he'd had in the diner, but with an additional layer of concern that Emily found under other circumstances she might have appreciated. "Ms. Carter," Webb said, bagging the note, "I have to be honest with you about something. Please. Last night's incident, the item left in the booth, we have it with forensics. But it's going to take time. And what I can tell you is that the 3 individuals you described do not match anyone we have on file locally." He paused. "Which means they came from somewhere else." "I know," Emily said. "Which means someone sent them here specifically." "I know that too." Webb glanced at Jack, who was standing near the kitchen doorway, not crowding the space but present. "Mr. Holloway," Webb said, and there was a carefulness in the way he said it, a professional politeness over something more complicated. "Do you have any idea who might have arranged last night's?" "I have ideas," Jack said. "Nothing I can prove yet." "But you're looking." "Deputy, I have been looking for 6 months." A brief silence. Webb looked back at Emily. Ms. Carter, I can request a patrol pass by your building a couple times a night. That's honestly the most I can do right now. Emily looked at him. A couple times a night, she repeated. I know it's not. It's fine, she said. Thank you. After Webb left, Emily sat in the silence of her kitchen and looked at the table where the envelope had been. She was thinking very calmly and very clearly about the mechanics of being afraid, about how fear was only useful when it made you do something, and about how the opposite of invisible wasn't loud or obvious or threatening. The opposite of invisible was present. She looked at Jack. You said last night that you'd make sure someone showed up for me. He met her gaze. I meant it, he said. What does that actually look like? She asked. Practically speaking, what does that mean? Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. It was the first time he had sat down since arriving, and somehow that made it feel serious in a different way. It means, he said, that until we figure out who sent those three men and what they're actually after, you are not going to be alone. Someone will be outside this building every night. Someone will be at the diner when you work. You won't see them all the time, but they'll be there. Emily stared at him. You're talking about protecting me? Yes. Because I warned you? Yes. She stopped. She had been about to say too much, but she caught herself because the thing that immediately followed too much in her mind was the image of the three-word note and the certainty that those three men had been inside the space where she slept, and suddenly too much felt like exactly the wrong words. Okay, she said. Jack nodded. One condition, Emily said. He raised an eyebrow. I need to know what's actually going on, not the edited version, not the you don't need to know the details version. She held his gaze. I'm already in this. I deserve to know what I'm in. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Fair, he said, Mom. He told her about Victor Kane on a Tuesday morning in her own kitchen over a coffee she made herself, because doing something with her hands helped her think while Marcus stood in the hallway, and the red-haired man she still hadn't been formally introduced to sat outside in a truck she could see from her window. Victor Kane was 54 years old. He had grown up in Denver, made his first significant money in commercial real estate in his late 20s, and had spent the following 2 decades building a pattern that was on the surface completely legal, and beneath the surface one of the most coldly effective machines of coercion Emily had ever heard described. He targeted small communities, places where the economy was soft enough that property values were low and people were vulnerable, but where something, a planned development, a new highway exit, a rezoning possibility, was about to change that. He would identify those communities 12 to 18 months before the change buy-in quietly through holding companies, and then begin the process of convincing existing property owners to sell. Sometimes the convincing was straightforward. Sometimes it was not. 6 businesses in this county have sold to Kane's company in the last 8 months, Jack said. All of them sold below market value. 3 of those owners told me they were under pressure to sell. 2 of them said they'd received visits from men who advised them to reconsider their position. And the third, Emily asked, a pause. The third one said he didn't remember anything about the visits, Jack said. He said it very quickly, and he did not meet my eyes when he said it. Emily wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. And you're in the way because I own property on the east side of Red Creek, Jack said. About 9 acres. Kane wants it. I've been saying no for 6 months. So last night was a message, he said, or a solution, depending on how it went. Emily absorbed this. Victor Kane hired 3 men she stopped, to do what exactly? Hurt you, kill you. Jack was quiet. Jack. The item in the booth was a tracking device, he said, professional grade, military spec. Emily set her coffee mug down. They weren't just planning to scare you, she said slowly. No, they were planning to know where you were at all times so they could, yes. A very long silence. Victor Kane, Emily said. Her voice was different now, quieter. He's not some street-level criminal. No, Jack agreed, he is not. He's a businessman with money and lawyers and people who do very precise things on his behalf. Yes. Emily looked at the table where the envelope had been. She thought about a man she had never met, a man in a suit. Somewhere, probably a man with an office and a phone and people who handled things for him. And she thought about how a man like that saw a waitress at a diner. He hadn't seen her as a problem. He hadn't even seen her. That was the thing about being invisible your whole life. People like Victor Kane depended on it. Their entire operation depended on the certainty that certain people, the tired ones, the poor ones, the ones who worked overnight shifts for tips, would stay in the background and not become inconvenient. Emily felt something shift in her chest, not fear, something harder than fear. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Jack looked at her carefully. "Right now, nothing. We need you to—" "I'm a witness," she said. "I saw their faces. I heard part of their conversation." "Emily, what did they say?" she pressed. "In the booth, what did I almost hear? What was the rest of it?" Jack was quiet. "The man in the baseball cap," she said. "He said something before the other one told him to give it a minute, and there was something before that, something I didn't catch." Jack set his own mug down. "What did you hear exactly?" he asked. His voice had changed slightly. She recognized the change she'd heard it last night in the diner, the same shift from casual to focused. "I heard something's off," she said, "and then give it a minute." And the first man said something's off again. But before all of that, she pressed her memory hard back into the specific quality of that silence, the specific arrangement of sounds in the almost empty diner. There was something about a number, a time maybe, or a date. Jack went very still. "What kind of number?" he asked. "I don't know. I only caught it in the edge of a turn. I wasn't facing them." She shook her head. "3 digits, maybe 4. It wasn't a time like midnight or something. It was more like—" She stopped. "Like an address or a unit number." Jack turned to Marcus in the doorway. Marcus was already on his phone. The next thing that happened, the thing Emily hadn't anticipated and hadn't been prepared for, was that Jack asked her to leave her apartment. Not forever, not dramatically, just for the next few days, until the situation was better understood and the men who had been in her home had been identified. "I have work," she said. "I know. I can't just not show up to work. I've already talked to Dale." Emily stared at him. "You've already—" She stopped. "When did you talk to Dale?" "While you were talking to Webb." "You called my manager?" "I explained that there was a security situation related to an ongoing sheriff's investigation and that you might need some schedule flexibility." Emily sat with for a moment. "You called my manager," she said again, not angry exactly, but needing him to understand what that meant. "Dale is going to—" "Dale said, and I'm quoting directly," Jack said, "he said, whatever she needs, tell her, we've got her covered." He paused. "He also said to tell you the coffee's terrible without you." Despite everything, something almost like a laugh moved through Emily's chest. She pressed it down. "I'm not leaving my apartment because of some men who want me to be afraid," she said. "I know," Jack said, "and I respect that. But I'm asking you to come stay somewhere safer for a few days. Not because you're afraid, because you're smart." It was the right thing to say. She recognized that. She also recognized that she was tired. Bone tired, the specific exhaustion of a woman who had been awake for 26 hours after the most adrenaline-charged night of her life, and that her judgment when she was this tired was not her best judgment. "Where?" she asked. "There's a house," Jack said. "Belongs to a friend of mine, outside of town. She's not there right now. She's in New Mexico visiting her daughter. It's empty, it's clean, it's got 2 locks and an alarm system. Margaret, she's 70. She'll be pleased to know someone's keeping her plants alive." Emily looked at him. She thought about the envelope on the table. She thought about sleeping in this apartment alone tonight. She thought about the deadbolt she had locked that someone had opened. "Fine," she said, 3 days. 3 days, Jack agreed. "I need 20 minutes to pack." "Take 30. She went to her bedroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of her bed for exactly 90 seconds, hands in her lap, and looked at the room she had lived in for 3 years. The quilt her mother had made before she got sick. The lamp with the crooked shade she'd been meaning to replace since she moved in. The stack of paperback novels on her nightstand, the spines cracked and soft from rereading. She thought, "I am a woman who warned a stranger, and now there are men who know my name and where I sleep." She thought I would do it again. She was surprised to realize she meant it. She stood up and packed a bag. The house was not what she expected. She had expected something rough-edged, something that reflected in her private imagination what a biker's friend's house would look like. She was not sure exactly what that meant in her head, but she had some version of it. What she found was a small, neat house with a vegetable garden, running along the south side and clean curtains in the windows, in a bookshelf in the living room, so full that volumes were stacked horizontally on top of vertical rows. On the kitchen table was a note in spidery handwriting that said, Emily Coffee's in the blue cabinet teas on the left of the stove. The gray cat is named Roosevelt, and he will tell you he hasn't been fed. He has. Don't be fooled. Margaret. Emily read the note twice. She stood in the middle of a stranger's kitchen and felt for the first time in what seemed like a very long time, the strange sensation of being expected, of a space that had been arranged by someone who had never met her to make her feel welcome. Roosevelt appeared from somewhere and sat at her feet and looked up at her with the accusatory certainty of a cat who had absolutely not been fed recently. Nice try, Emily said. She put her bag in the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She had not cried yet through any of this, not from the three men in the booth, not from the note on her table, not from the knowledge that people who did precise and professional things on behalf of a wealthy man had been in the space where she slept. She had not cried, but she sat there for a while with her face in her hands and she breathed, and Roosevelt jumped up on the bed beside her and pressed his head against her arm with the firm conviction of a cat who had decided this was now his job. Okay, she said to the cat. Okay, Webb. Marcus came by that evening. She had not been formally introduced, and she realized as he came through the door, knocking first 3 times, which she had been told to expect, that she still didn't know his last name. Marcus Webb, he said when she pointed this out, extending his hand. No relation to the deputy before you ask. We get that a lot around here. Is Jack coming? He's dealing with something. He'll be by tomorrow. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with the ease of someone who had been here before, probably many times. He set a bag on the table. Inside was a container of soup, a foil-wrapped something that turned out to be cornbread, and a folder. Jack thought you might want to know more, Marcus said, nodding at the folder. About Kane, what we've put together. Emily pulled the folder toward her. He put together a file, 6 months of one. She opened it. She was not sure what she expected. What she found was methodical property records, business filings, a timeline of sales, and the county photographs of what she assumed were Kane's representatives meeting with business owners, printouts of holding company registrations, notes in Jack's handwriting that were precise and structured in a way that surprised her. Jack did all this, she asked. Jack me couple others. Marcus paused. Jack went to school for 2 years, criminal justice, before he went a different direction. Emily looked up. I didn't know that. Most people don't, he shrugged. He doesn't advertise it. Point is, we're not just people who ride motorcycles and make people nervous. Some of us actually know what we're doing. She heard something under the flat delivery. Not defensiveness. Something more patient than defensiveness. The tone of a man who had spent a long time being misunderstood and had made peace with it. I didn't think that, Emily said, and she meant it. Marcus looked at her. Something in his expression relaxed slightly. Kane's pattern is consistent, he said, leaning forward. He identifies a target area. He sends representatives to make offers. When the offers get refused, the advisors arrive. When the advisors don't work, he paused. People get accidents, or they get scared enough that they move away, or they sell because something else goes wrong, their license gets pulled, or there's a fire or someone files a complaint with the county that has to be investigated. And Jack's been saying no. For 6 months, Jack's the anchor. The other businesses, if Jack sells the rest, probably fold. Kane knows that. That's why last night was, he stopped. Why last night was more than a tracking device, Emily said. Marcus was quiet. He wasn't just planning to follow Jack, she said. Was he? A long pause. The device was a tracker, Marcus said carefully. But we found information this afternoon that the device also had a secondary function. Emily set the folder down. What kind of secondary function? She asked very quietly. The kind that requires a specific frequency and a proximity trigger, Marcus said. She sat with that. She turned it over in her mind. Marcus, she said. Yeah. Victor Kane tried to kill Jack last night. Marcus looked at the table, then at her. Yeah, he said. We think so. Emily put her hands flat on the table and breathed. And I'm the only person outside of Kane's operation who knows what those 3 men look like, she said. You and the diner's security camera, Marcus said, which Dale checked this morning. The image quality is, he made a face. Not great, grainy, Hard to make out details. But I could identify them. In a lineup, yes. In a courtroom, yes. He paused. Which is why the note on your table said what it said. Emily looked at her hands. She understood the mechanics of her situation with complete clarity now. She was not collateral. She was not a bystander who had stumbled into something. She was in the specific and practical language of what Victor Kane needed to clean up a loose end. A waitress nobody had been supposed to notice, who had noticed everything. What happens now? She asked. Marcus looked at her steadily. Now, he said, we figure out who those three men are, and we figure out what Victor Kane is actually planning for Red Creek, and we make sure we can prove it before he figures out that we're doing it. Emily nodded slowly. And me. You stay here. You stay safe. You trust us. A long pause. You're asking me to trust a group of Hell's Angels with my life, Emily said. Yes. She thought about Margaret's note on the kitchen table. She thought about cornbread and a file folder full of 6 months of careful, methodical work. She thought about a man who had looked at her across a counter at 2:40 in the morning and said with complete simplicity, I'm going to make sure someone shows up for you. Okay, she said. Marcus nodded. He stood to go. At the kitchen door, he paused, his hand on the frame, and turned back. Emily, he said. She looked at him. What you did last night, he said. I've been with Jack a long time, 15 years off and on. In those 15 years, I can count on one hand the times somebody outside the group went out of their way for him. He looked at her directly. You didn't know him. You didn't owe him anything. He stopped. Like the words were ones he wasn't used to needing. You just did the right thing because it was the right thing. Emily held his gaze. I know what it's like, she said, when nobody does. Marcus nodded. He left. Emily sat in Margaret's kitchen with Roosevelt in her lap and a folder full of evidence of a man's crimes on the table in front of her. And she thought about being invisible and about how sometimes the most dangerous thing a person like Victor Kane could do was make the wrong woman feel like she had nothing left to lose. She had warned Jack Holloway to save his life. She had not known then that the same decision would crack her own life, open would reach down into the hollow. Careful, invisible life she had built inside 3 years of overnight shifts and unpaid bills and solitude, and pull something out of it she hadn't known was still there. Something that felt against all reasonable expectation like purpose. Outside the window, a truck sat on the gravel road. She could see the faint glow of a cigarette through the glass. Someone was there, watching, making sure. Emily Carter looked at the truck and at the folder and at the gray cat on her lap. Then she reached for the folder again and kept reading. She read the file for 3 hours. Roosevelt fell asleep on her lap sometime around midnight, and Emily didn't move him because the warmth of him was grounding in a way she didn't want to lose, and she kept turning pages with one hand while her coffee went cold beside her, and the more she read, the more a specific kind of anger replaced the fear in her chest. Not hot anger, not the kind that made you want to shout, the cold, quiet kind, the kind that settles in and stays. Victor Kane had been doing this for 11 years. 11 years across 4 states. Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah. The same pattern, the same precision, the same complete confidence that the people he was moving out of their own communities were too small, too tired, and too alone to stop him. Property records in the folder showed 17 communities where Kane's holding companies had accumulated land before a major development came in. In 14 of those 17, the original business owners were gone within 2 years. In 3 of the cases, there were sheriff's reports, attached reports that had been filed, investigated to a point, and then quietly closed. Emily turned to those pages and read them carefully. One report from a small town in Wyoming described a diner owner, 67 years old, 40 years in business, who had sold his property for 30 cents on the dollar after his building caught fire twice in 6 weeks, and his business license was temporarily revoked on a health code complaint that was according to a handwritten note clipped to the back of the report, unsubstantiated upon inspection. The case had been closed due to insufficient evidence of criminal intent. The diner owner's name was Harold Briggs. She stared at that name for a long time. A 67-year-old man who had spent 40 years building something ground down until he had nothing left to protect it with. She closed the folder. She sat in the quiet of Margaret's kitchen. She thought about what Marcus had told her, that Victor Kane needed to clean up loose ends. that she was a loose end because she could identify the men who had come to Red Creek on his behalf. She thought about the note on her kitchen table, the 3 words chosen specifically to trigger the deepest fear available to a woman who had spent years being invisible. They thought they knew exactly what she was. A waitress. Middle-aged, alone, no power, no resources, no reason for anyone important to believe her over a man with lawyers and money and a perfect paper trail. They had looked at her life and concluded she would go back to being invisible because she had no other option. They were wrong. But she didn't know yet how wrong they were or how much was about to change. She only knew sitting in that kitchen at midnight with a sleeping cat in her lap and a folder full of a man's crimes on the table that she was done pretending she hadn't seen what she'd seen. Jack came the next morning. She heard the truck on the gravel before she heard the knock 3 times the way Marcus had done, and she was already at the door. He looked like he hadn't slept. She recognized that look because she was wearing it too. "Coffee?" she asked. "God, yes." She poured 2 cups. He sat at the table and looked at the folder which she had reorganized and flagged with Post-it notes from a pad she'd found in Margaret's kitchen drawer. He looked at the Post-its. He looked at her. "You flagged the Wyoming cases," he said. "And the New Mexico ones," she said. "The pattern in New Mexico is slightly different. He used a code complaint, escalation there instead of property incidents. But the result was the same. 3 businesses sold inside 90 days. She sat down across from him. "He always moves in groups. He never isolates one target. He applies pressure across multiple businesses simultaneously so that when one sells, the others feel like the last one standing." Jack was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. "You read the whole thing," he said. "I read it 3 times. A pause. "Jack," she said, "who else has seen this file besides your people?" He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. "We took it to an attorney 8 weeks ago. She reviewed it and said that without a direct link between Kane personally and the men making the advisory visits, the property sales themselves are legal. The fire in Wyoming, the statute of limitations has run. The Wyoming case is closed." He stopped. "She said we needed someone on the inside or we needed a direct witness to something that crossed a clear criminal line." Emily set her coffee down. "Or both," she said. Jack looked at her. "You have a witness," she said quietly. "You have me. I heard those men in the booth. I heard something about a number, an address, or a unit number. You said Marcus was working on identifying it. He is. What has he found?" Jack was quiet for a moment. She recognized the hesitation, not the kind that came from not knowing, but the kind that came from deciding how much to say. "Jack, he found a commercial property," Jack said. "Storage facility east side of Red Creek, registered to a holding company." He paused. "A holding company that traces back through 3 layers of incorporation to one of Kane's subsidiary entities." Emily felt the hair on her arms rise. "The number I heard," she said, "it was a unit number." "Unit 14, Jack said. A silence. "What's in Unit 14, Emily asked. Jack's jaw tightened. "We don't know yet. But you think..." "I think Victor Kane has been operating in Red Creek for 7 months and has not been here personally in the last 2 of those months. I think he has people here managing the operation, and I think whatever is in that storage unit is part of that management." He paused. "And I think that if we can establish what's in there and connect it to Kane's people in a way that law enforcement can act on the Wyoming and New Mexico cases reopen. Everything reopens." Emily put her hands flat on the table. "So what's the problem?" she said. "The problem," Jack said carefully, "is that we cannot go in there ourselves. If we do, anything we find is inadmissible. And if Kane's lawyers find out that a Hells Angels chapter president went into one of his storage units, the entire thing gets buried under the story of who did the searching." "Webb," Emily said immediately. "The deputy. Webb needs cause. He needs more than what we have right now to get a judge to sign off on a warrant. What does he need? He needs the men from the diner identified. He needs a connection established between those men and Kane. And he needs something in addition to a grainy diner security tape." Jack looked at her steadily. "He needs a clear, credible witness statement from someone who has no connection to the Hells Angels, no prior relationship with me, and no reason to be lying." The room went quiet. Emily understood what he was saying. She understood all of it. "You're describing me," she said. "Yes." "And you didn't want to ask me," she said. "Because of the note on my table. Because of what I'm already involved in. Because you didn't sign up for this, Jack said. His voice was quiet and direct. You warned me because it was the right thing to do. What I'm describing now is different. I'm describing you sitting in front of a judge and putting your name on a statement that will be visible to Victor Kane's lawyers. I'm describing you becoming the face of the witness testimony in a case against a man with significant resources and a track record he stopped, of making problems disappear, Emily said. Yes. She looked at him. She thought about Harold Briggs in his 40 years and his diner. She thought about the businesses in New Mexico and Wyoming and Utah, about all the people who had received advisors and fires and license complaints, and had sold for 30 cents on the dollar because they were standing alone and there was nobody to stand with them. She thought about a specific morning. She was 8 years old and there had been a situation in her house that a neighbor should have called about, and the neighbor had stood at the window and watched and done nothing. And Emily had known even then, even at 8, that the neighbor was not a bad person. The neighbor was simply afraid and alone and had decided that staying invisible was the only safe choice. She had spent 33 years being angry at that neighbor. She was not going to become that neighbor. Tell me exactly what I need to do, she said. Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Are you sure? I was sure at 2 in the morning in a diner when I didn't even know your last name, Emily said. I'm a lot more sure now. She met with Deputy Terrence Webb that afternoon. Not at the sheriff's office, at Margaret's kitchen table, because Jack had made the case to Webb that Emily's location should stay quiet for now, and Webb had agreed with the speed of a man who had been thinking the same thing. Webb came alone. He was out of uniform, which told Emily more than he probably intended. He was treating this as something that existed outside his official capacity, at least for now, which meant he was taking it seriously in a way that the paperwork wasn't ready for yet. He sat down and put a recorder on the table. Ms. Carter, I want to be clear about what this is and what it isn't, he said. This is an informal statement. It's not sworn testimony. It won't be submitted to the court in this form. What it will do is give me a basis to bring to the county attorney and make a case for a warrant. I understand, Emily said. You understand also that once this process starts, Webb, she said. He stopped. She looked at him. I read a file last night about a 67-year-old man named Harold Briggs who lost his business of 40 years. I read about 3 other communities where the same thing happened to people who had nothing to fall back on. She paused. I'm a night shift waitress with bad knees and a savings account that would make you sad. If I stay invisible, Victor Kane wins. If I stay invisible, someone like Harold Briggs happens again in Red Creek. I'm not staying invisible. Webb looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached over and pressed the record button. Start from when the 3 men walked into the Red Creek road stop, he said. Emily started. She talked for 40 minutes without stopping. She described the 3 men with the precision she had spent 3 years honing the baseball cap, the jackets, the way they'd assessed the room, the positions they'd chosen, the stillness. That wasn't the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of readiness. She described the partial conversation she'd overheard, and the number what she was now certain was Unit 14, and the voice of the man she hadn't been able to see fully, a third voice that was different from the other 2, flatter, colder, the voice of someone giving instructions rather than receiving them. Webb looked up from his notes. A third voice. At least, she said. I couldn't determine if there was someone else at the booth. The angle was wrong, but the third voice was not one of the 3 men I could see. It was different. Webb wrote something. Could it have been a phone call, he asked. Emily thought about that carefully. She went back in her memory with the same patience she had used reading the folder, methodical, not rushing it. No, she said slowly. The acoustics were wrong for a phone call. It was a voice in the room. But you only saw 3 men. I only saw 3 men sitting in the booth, she said. I never looked at what was behind the booth, against the wall. Webb set his pen down. He looked at her. Emily, he said in the informality of it, first name quiet tone, told her this was important. If there was a 4th person, someone you couldn't see, who do you think that person was? She thought about it. She thought about Victor Kane's operation, about the layers of holding companies, about the pattern across 4 states. She thought about the way an operation like his worked, the men who made offers, the advisors who came after refusals, and then something above both of those. Someone who showed up when the situation required more than an advisor. Someone in charge of the operation here, she said. Not Kane himself, but someone who managed the men on the ground. Webb picked his pen back up. His hand was moving fast. She found out 3 days later that she had been right. Marcus came to the house in the early evening, and he had the look of a man who had been waiting all day to say something and was choosing his words carefully as he sat down at the table. "We identified the baseball cap," he said. Emily straightened. "Who is he, Asita?" "His name is Dale Pruitt. He has a record in 2 states: assault, intimidation, 1 charge of arson that was pled down. He's worked for 3 different development companies in the last 8 years. Marcus paused. "All 3 of those companies have connections to Kane's holding entity. Can you prove that connection?" "Webb can prove it." "How?" Marcus said. "Because Kane's company paid Pruitt through a shell entity, but Pruitt used his real social security number on the filing. It's a thread. It's a real thread." Emily felt something release slightly in her chest. "The others? Still working on the full IDs. But here's what else." He leaned forward. "The storage unit. Webb took the information to the county attorney this morning. Based on your statement, the partial conversation, and the corporate trace, he got a preliminary agreement. They're drawing up the warrant." Emily pressed her hands together. "How long?" she asked. "Days," Marcus said. "Maybe less." She sat with that, days. A week ago, she had been refilling Pete's coffee and thinking about which bill to pay first. Now she was sitting in a stranger's house, waiting for a search warrant that she had helped build with her own testimony. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah." "Who was the 4th person in that diner?" He went still. It was a different kind of still from the men in the booth. It was the still of someone who knew the answer and was deciding whether to say it. "Marcus." "We have a name," he said carefully. "I don't want to say it until it's confirmed." "Is it someone local?" He looked at her. "Is it someone from Red Creek?" she pressed. "Emily." "Because if Victor Kane has someone locally managing this operation," she said, "that's not just a criminal operation. That's a betrayal. That's someone this town trusts who has been working against it." Marcus was quiet. "Is it someone from the county?" she asked. Still quiet. Her mind moved through the possibilities with the same quick scanning attention that had served her all her life. Someone with access. Someone who would know the community well enough to identify targets, track resistance, understand the local dynamics well enough to manage an operation like Kane's across months. "Webb's investigation is going to find it," she said. "Whatever you know." "I know," Marcus said. "Then tell me." He looked at her for a long moment. "There's a county official," he said at last. "Mid-level, planning and development office. He's been with the county 11 years. Emily felt the cold come back. "He's been giving Kane information," she said, "about properties, about owners, about who's vulnerable. And about Jack," Marcus said, "about the land Jack owns, about why it matters to the development plan Kane is backing." "Jack knew," Emily said suddenly. Not a question. "He knew or suspected there was someone on the inside." "For about 3 months," Marcus said. "We couldn't prove it. We couldn't even get close to proving it without tipping them off. And the 4th person in that diner, we believe," Marcus said carefully, "was the county official, coming to verify that the operation was in motion." Emily sat back. She thought about a man with a county job, steady, respected, invisible in his own way, who had been selling his community out for 11 years, piece by piece, name by name, for whatever Kane paid him. She thought about the specific cruelty of it, that the people who had been ground down by Kane's operation had been betrayed not just by an outside force, but by someone they had elected or employed or passed in the grocery store on a Saturday morning. "What's his name?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "Not yet, when we're sure." She accepted that, but she held on to the fact of it, the presence of a 4th person in a booth. She hadn't been looking at a voice she had caught at the edge of hearing a detail she had almost discarded as background noise, but had instead filed away in the careful, patient archive her mind had been building since she was 8 years old. The detail that might bring the whole thing down. On the 4th day at Margaret's house, Jack came back. He came in the morning earlier than before, and he had the particular energy of someone who had news they were still processing. "Webb executed the warrant," he said before he even sat down. Emily looked up from the folder which she had been going through again. "When this morning, 6 a.m., Unit 14, Unit 14. She set the folder down. "What did they find?" Jack pulled out a chair and sat. He looked tired, and something else, something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very, very long time and has just set it down, but his muscles still remember the weight. Documents, he said, financial records, correspondence, printed emails and letters. A ledger. He paused. A very detailed ledger of every payment made in connection with the Red Creek operation. Names, amounts, dates. The room went quiet. Names, Emily said carefully, including the county official, Jack said. 11 years of payments, starting the month he took the planning job. Emily closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. It's real, she said, not a question. Webb called the state attorney general's office this morning. They're sending investigators. She opened her eyes. Victor Kane, she said, is currently in Denver, Jack said. Webb has been in contact with federal authorities. The scale of this across 4 states, it's federal jurisdiction. Emily absorbed this, the whole weight of it, the Wyoming cases, the New Mexico files, Harold Briggs and his 40 years, the businesses in Utah. All of it suddenly connected to this moment this morning, this storage unit that a man had rented under a shell company and thought was invisible. The ledger, she said, is it enough? The federal prosecutor Webb spoke to, Jack said, used the word significant. Emily let a breath she felt like she had been holding for 4 days. Then something occurred to her. Jack, she said, the warrant. It was based on my testimony on what I heard in that diner. Yes. Which means Victor Kane's lawyers will know your name, Jack said quietly. Yes, when this goes to formal proceedings, you'll be named as the originating witness. She looked at him. She had known this was coming. She had agreed to it. She had made the decision with her eyes fully open and her hands flat on Margaret's kitchen table and a sleeping cat in her lap, in 33 years of being the neighbor at the window, pressing down on her from the inside. She had known. Knowing it in theory and sitting with the reality of it were 2 different things. Victor Kane is going to know who I am, she said. He may already, Jack said carefully. He may already, she repeated. Because the man who left a note on my table already reported back. Yes. A silence. So what happens now, she asked. Now the state and federal process runs, Jack said. And now I make absolutely certain that nothing reaches you before it does. He looked at her with the same direct, unadorned honesty that he had brought to every conversation they had had across the last 4 days. I told you someone would show up for you. That's not changing. She nodded, but something was moving in her that was more than reassurance. Something that had started as a small, cold thing in her chest when she had first read about Harold Briggs and his 40 years and had been growing steadily through every page of the folder, every conversation with Marcus, every careful word from Webb. Jack, she said, I want to do something. He waited. I want to talk to the other business owners, she said. The ones in Red Creek who are still resisting, the ones who haven't sold yet. She met his gaze. They're scared. They're standing alone. They don't know what's in that storage unit yet or what the state attorney general's office is doing. They just know that a powerful man's people keep showing up at their doors. Jack was quiet. I know how to talk to people who are scared and alone, she said. I know that might not sound like much, but I've been that person my whole life. And nobody ever, she stopped, gathered herself. Nobody ever showed up and told me what was real, what was actually happening. They just let me be afraid in the dark. Jack looked at her for a long time. Then he said, there are 7 business owners in Red Creek who haven't sold and are still under pressure. I want to talk to all 7. Some of them are going to be suspicious of you. I know. Some of them won't believe you. I know that too. Emily. His voice was different, quieter, and weighted with something that she was starting to recognize as the way Jack Holloway expressed things that mattered to him. You understand that what you're describing is putting yourself even further into the middle of this. I'm already in the middle, she said. I've been in the middle since I whispered 3 words to you over a coffee counter. She looked at him. I'd rather be in the middle doing something than hiding in someone else's house, waiting for other people to handle it. A long pause. Jack nodded. I'll set up the meetings, he said. The first meeting was with a woman named Carol Spence, who had owned a hardware store on Red Creek's Main Street for 22 years and had received 3 offers from Kane's company in the last 5 months, each one lower than the last, and had said no each time. Emily met her in the back of the hardware store between aisles of pipe fittings and packets of screws, and Carol Spence was 64 years old and had the look of a woman who had been afraid for so long that the fear had compressed itself into something that looked almost like resignation. Emily sat down across from her. She didn't start with the storage unit or the warrant or Victor Kane's name. She started with, "Do you want to know what's actually happening? Because I can tell you, and then you can decide what to do with it." Carol Spence looked at her. "Who are you?" she asked, not unfriendly, just careful. "My name is Emily Carter," she said. "I'm a waitress at the Road Stop Diner, and 4 nights ago I overheard 3 men planning to do something very specific to a man at my diner. And I made a decision to say something, and now I know more about what's been happening in this town than I ever expected to." Carol looked at her for a long moment. "What are you going to tell me?" she asked. "The truth," Emily said. "All of it." Carol Spence looked at her hands, at the hardware store around her, at 22 years of her life built into the shelves and the floor, and the accounts and the relationships. "Okay," she said. "Tell me," Emily told her. She told it the same way she had told it to Webb, precisely factually, without drama or embellishment, because she had learned a long time ago that fear was best answered not with reassurance but with information. People who were afraid needed to know what was real. What was real was almost always less terrifying than what fear invented in the dark. By the end, Carol Spence's hands were still. Her eyes were clear. She said, "So they're actually going to be caught?" "Yes," Emily said. "And I don't have to sell." "You never had to," Emily said gently. "They were never going to force you. They were counting on you being afraid enough to do it yourself." Carol looked at her. "How did you know to say something?" she asked. "That night, why didn't you just stay behind the counter?" Emily thought about that. "Because," she said, "I spent a long time being the person nobody showed up for. And I decided a long time ago that if I ever had the chance to show up for someone else, I was going to take it. Even if I was afraid." Carol Spence was quiet. Then she said very simply, "Thank you." And something in Emily, something that had been hollow for longer than she could measure, filled in just a little. She met with the other 6 owners over the next 2 days. Each conversation was different. 2 of them cried. One of them, a man named Gene Russo, who had run a small auto repair shop for 30 years, stood up and shook her hand at the end, and then stood there holding her hand without saying anything for a full 10 seconds, like he needed the contact of another person to make it feel real. None of them had known about the others. That was part of how Kane operated, keeping the targets isolated, each one thinking they were alone, each one too exhausted and frightened to compare notes with their neighbors. Emily was functionally the note comparison. She was the person who moved between them and said, "You are not alone. Here is what is real. Here is what is coming. Here is where to go when you need help." By the 3rd day, something had shifted in Red Creek that was hard to see directly but impossible to miss if you paid attention. Business owners were talking to each other. Carol Spence called Gene Russo. Gene called a woman named Teresa who owned a bakery 2 blocks east. Teresa had a cousin who was a property attorney in Fort Collins. A network was forming. Slowly, imperfectly, out of fear and phone calls, and Emily Carter moving between people like a thread pulling a scattered fabric back together. Jack watched it happen with an expression she couldn't quite read. One evening, standing in the parking lot of the hardware store after the 3rd day of meetings, he said, "You know what you're doing, right?" She looked at him. "Connecting people who should have been connected months ago." "I've been trying to do that for 6 months, he said. "I know," she said. "They talk to you differently than they talk to me." She thought about why that was. Not because she was more trustworthy than Jack, she didn't think that was it, but because she looked like them. She was tired and had bad knees and unpaid bills and a job she'd kept for 3 years, not because she loved it, but because it was reliable. She carried no power, no reputation, no visible resources. She looked like someone who had nothing to lose and still showed up anyway. That was the thing that moved people, not strength, evidence that it was possible to show up even when it cost you something. "Victor Kane's lawyers filed a motion this morning," Jack said, shifting his weight. His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. Emily looked at him. "What motion?" "To identify and depose the originating witness in connection with the warrant application." A pause. "Me," she said. "You," he met her gaze. "They know your name. They know you work at the road stop. They filed a motion to compel your testimony in a civil context before the criminal proceedings get fully underway. It's a delay tactic. Kane's done it before. He tries to exhaust witnesses before the case is built enough to protect them." Emily stood with this. She felt the fear try to come back, the old reflexive fear, the invisible woman's fear, the fear of being seen and targeted and alone. She let herself feel it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "When do I need to give testimony?" Jack blinked. "Emily Bonds, when," she said. "The federal attorney is contesting the motion. It may not happen." "If it does happen," she said, "when 10 days maybe?" She nodded. "Okay," she said. "Then we have 10 days to make sure the case is solid enough that my testimony is one piece of it and not the whole thing." Jack stared at her. She stared back. "You are," he said slowly, "not what I expected." "People rarely expect what they don't bother to look at," she said. He was quiet. "Then Victor Kane has never faced a witness who wouldn't be shaken." "I've been invisible my whole life," Emily said. "I don't shake easy. You don't when there's nothing left to lose." Something crossed Jack Holloway's face that was part recognition, part something more careful and private. "You have things to lose," he said quietly. "Don't forget that." She looked at him. He was right. She did. She had things to lose now that she hadn't had a week ago, the threat of something in her chest that had been hollow and was slowly, painfully filling in. The connection she was building. The network forming around her like the beginning of a safety net she had never had. She had things to lose. And that was exactly why she wasn't going to stop. "Then I'd better make sure I win," she said. Outside, the late afternoon light was fading over Red Creek. Somewhere across town, Carol Spence was on the phone. Gene Russo was calling his property lawyer. Teresa from the bakery was writing down names. Victor Kane had built his operation on the certainty that the people he targeted would stay invisible, stay afraid, stay scattered and alone. He had miscalculated one thing. He had miscalculated Emily Carter. And in Red Creek, Colorado, in the slow gathering of an October evening, the woman nobody had expected to matter was becoming the one person he could not afford to ignore. The deposition notice arrived on a Thursday. Emily was at the hardware store with Carol Spence when Marcus called. She heard it in his voice before he said a word, that particular controlled flatness that people use when they are delivering news they wish they weren't delivering. "Kane's attorneys got the motion approved," he said, a partial approval. "You're not compelled to testify in a civil deposition, but they've filed an official witness identification request through the criminal proceedings. Your name, your employer, your address, it's all in their filing now." Emily stood very still between the shelves of pipe fittings. Carol looked at her and stopped talking mid-sentence. "All of it," Emily said. "All of it. Federal attorney contested it. Judge allowed the identification but denied full deposition access. It's a partial win. But Emily," he stopped. "Say it, Marcus. Kane's people know exactly who you are and where to find you." She pressed her phone harder against her ear. "Does Jack know? He's the one who called me to call you. He's on his way to you now." She thanked him and hung up. Carol was watching her with the careful attention of a woman who had learned to read bad news in other people's faces. "How bad?" Carol asked. "Manageable," Emily said. She was surprised to find she meant it. Carol looked at her for a moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over Emily's. "You came to my store," Carol said quietly. "You sat in my back room and told me the truth when you didn't have to. You could have stayed in that house and waited for someone else to handle it." She paused. "Whatever happens next, we're not going to let you stand alone." Emily looked at her. She had spent 3 years serving coffee to people who didn't look at her. 3 years of being the woman who kept things moving in the background while everyone else went on with their lives. 3 years of invisible. Carol Spence's hand on hers felt like the opposite of 3 years. She swallowed. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Carol said firmly. "Tell me what we can do." Jack arrived 12 minutes later. He came through the back door of the hardware store and took one look at Emily standing between the shelves with Carol beside her, and something crossed his expression, relief. She thought that she was standing and not panicking. "You're okay," he said. "Same as the first time. Assessment, not question." "I'm okay," she said. "Tell me what this means practically, not legally, practically." He pulled her slightly away from Carol. Not because he didn't trust her, she understood, but because some things were easier to say without an audience. "It means Kane's legal team now controls the narrative about who you are," he said. "They're going to position you as a Hells Angels associate, someone who warned me as part of a pre-existing relationship. They're going to try to discredit you before you ever set foot in a courtroom." Emily absorbed this. They're going to say I'm lying, she said. They're going to say you have a motive to lie. Do they have anything to support that? Not yet, Jack said. But they're going to dig your financials, your history, your relationships. Anyone you've ever had a conflict with, any complaint ever filed against you, anything they can use to complicate your credibility. He paused. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She looked at him steadily. Ask. Is there anything in your past, anything at all that Kane's lawyers could use to paint you as unreliable, a criminal record, even minor? A history of complaints at work? Anything? Emily thought about this with the same methodical patience she had brought to the folder. I had a DUI, she said. 14 years ago. I wasn't driving, I was the passenger and the officer cited the wrong person, and it was expunged 2 years later. I have documentation. Jack nodded. What else? I filed a complaint against my ex-husband during the divorce. It was related to property, not anything, nothing criminal on my end. The case was settled. She paused. I was late on my rent twice in 2019, and my landlord sent a written notice. That's the full extent of my relationship with official documentation. Jack looked at her. That's nothing, he said. That's genuinely nothing. I live a quiet life, she said simply. I was quiet for a moment. The federal attorney needs to talk to you today if possible. She wants to get ahead of the narrative before Kane's team files anything further. What's her name? Sandra Okafor. She's flying in from Denver. He checked his watch. She lands in 3 hours. Emily nodded. Okay, she said. Let's go. Sandra Okafor was not what Emily expected, and she realized immediately that she had been doing the thing she hated other people doing, building a picture of someone before she'd met them. The federal attorney was 47, compact and precise in the way of someone who had spent 20 years in rooms where every word was measured, and she had the particular quality of attention that Emily recognized because she shared it, the quality of a person who was always watching more than they appeared to be. They met in a conference room at the county building. Neutral ground. Webb had arranged it, and Okafor shook Emily's hand and said, I've read your statement. I want to hear it from you directly. Start wherever makes sense. Emily started at the beginning. She told it clean the way she always did. No embellishment, no hedging, no apology for the parts that made her sound presumptuous or strange. She described her training in reading rooms built over a lifetime and honed over 3 years of overnight shifts. She described the 3 men and what she had observed. She described the decision to speak. Okafor listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, there was a silence. Then Okafor said, You said you work overnight shifts. Yes. For how long? 3 years at the road stop. Before that, 6 years at a diner in Pueblo. 9 years of overnight shifts. Yes. You said you read people, that it's a skill you developed. It's a survival skill, Emily said. I grew up in a house where reading the room kept you out of trouble. I've been doing it since I was a child. Okafor wrote something. Emily, she said, I want to be transparent with you about how Kane's defense is going to approach this. They will argue that your interpretation of the 3 men's behavior was subjective. They will argue that you cannot know intent from body language. They will argue that your decision to warn Mr. Holloway suggests a pre-existing bias in his favor. She paused. They are very good at this. They have done it before. I know, Emily said. Does that change anything about your willingness to testify? Emily looked at her directly. No, she said. Okafor studied her. Why not, she asked. It wasn't hostile, it was genuinely curious. The question of a woman who had seen witnesses crumble and wanted to understand what made this one different. Emily thought about how to answer honestly. Because the alternative, she said slowly, is that I go back to being invisible. And I spent 41 years being invisible, and I don't have enough life left to spend any more of it that way. She paused. And because there are 7 business owners in this town who are standing up now, when a week ago they were ready to fold. And because there's a man named Harold Briggs in Wyoming who lost 40 years of his life to this operation, and I would rather face Victor Kane's lawyers than go to sleep at night knowing I had the chance to matter and I chose not to take it. The room was quiet. Okafor set her pen down. Miss Carter, she said, I have been a federal attorney for 19 years. I have prepared hundreds of witnesses. A pause. You are the clearest witness I have ever spoken to. Emily looked at her. Then let's make sure it counts, she said. Three things happened in the next 48 hours that changed the shape of everything. The first was Marcus. He came to Margaret's house that evening with the specific contained energy of a man carrying news that required careful handling. He sat at the kitchen table. Roosevelt immediately occupied his lap, which he accepted without comment, and he said, "We have the fourth person." Emily went very still. "Confirmed?" she asked. "Confirmed. Webb's team matched a partial fingerprint from the booth, the inside edge where you found the tracking device, to a county employee in the planning office. His name is Robert Garland. He's been with the county 11 years. Robert Garland. The name landed with the specific weight of a thing made real that had previously been abstract. "The ledger from the storage unit," Emily said, "has his initials on 23 separate payment entries going back to his first year in the job," Marcus said. "The earliest ones are small, a few $100s. By year 4, they're in the thousands. By year 8, he stopped." "How much?" Emily asked. Marcus told her. She was quiet for a moment. "He sold this community for that," she said. "He sold this community for that," Marcus confirmed. Emily thought about Robert Garland, a man she had probably passed in town, probably seen at the county fair or at a diner or at one of those small-town community events where everyone shows up and pretends to be one thing while being another. A man who had sat in a planning office for 11 years, deciding which properties got approved and which didn't, and had spent every one of those 11 years selling the answers to a man named Victor Kane. "I was in that booth," she said. "That night, he was there to watch it happen." "We believe so," Marcus said. "He knew what was planned," she said. "He wasn't just managing information, he was there to see it done." A silence. "Webb is picking him up tonight," Marcus said, quietly, before Kane's lawyers can get word to him to lawyer up and go silent. Emily nodded slowly. "And the second thing," she said, "you said 3 things happened. What are the other 2? Marcus looked at her steadily. "I said I came with news that required careful handling." "You did. The second thing is about your diner." Emily's chest tightened. "Dale called Jack this morning," Marcus said. "Someone came by last night after closing. They didn't break in, they left something outside. A note stuck to the door." "What did it say?" Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a piece of paper. He set it flat on the table. Emily read it. "Last chance to remember your place." She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up. "That's not a threat," she said. "That's desperation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Someone who has control doesn't send notes," she said. "Someone who sends notes has lost control and is trying to pretend they haven't." She pushed the paper back toward him. "Kane knows the warrant was executed. He knows Garland is exposed. He knows the federal attorney is involved. He's trying to rattle me into backing down before it gets worse for him." Marcus was quiet. "You might be right," he said. "I am right," she said. "What's the third thing?" Marcus looked at her. For the first time since she had met him, solid, measured, always controlled Marcus, he looked slightly uncertain about how to say something. "The third thing," he said, "is that Jack wants to talk to you tonight about something he should have told you earlier." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to call him and tell him you're ready when you are." Jack came an hour later. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, and he didn't have the folder, and he didn't have news to deliver. He had the look of a man who had been carrying something privately for a long time and had decided that the carrying was finished. "I need to tell you something about why Kane wants my land," he said. Emily waited. "I told you he targets communities before a development comes in, that the east side acreage is what he needs." Jack paused. "What I didn't tell you is why specifically. It's not just the land itself." "What's on it?" she asked. "Under it," he said, "there's a water rights filing from 1987. My father filed it. It gives the holder of the property control over a significant portion of the water access for any development in a 4-mile radius east of Red Creek." He paused. "Kane's development plan requires that water access. Without it, the development cannot be permitted." Emily sat with this. "So it was never just about your land," she said. "It was never just about the land," Jack said. "If I sell, he gets the water rights. If I don't sell, the whole development falls apart," she said. "Yes. That's why removing you was worth that level of method," she said carefully. "Not just a threat, not just an advisor, a precision operation." Yes, Emily looked at him. Why didn't you tell me this before? Jack was quiet for a moment. Because, he said, the more you knew about why Kane needed me gone, the more dangerous your position became. I thought if you understood the full value of what was at stake for him, you'd understand how far he was willing to go. He met her eyes. I was trying to protect you from the full weight of it by keeping me in the dark. Yes, Emily looked at the table. She thought about how she had felt reading the file, the gathering cold anger at a man who moved through other people's lives like they were pieces on a board. She thought about the businesses and the notes and the advisors and the man named Harold Briggs. She thought about all of it being anchored ultimately to water rights filed by a man named Holloway in 1987. I understand why you did it, she said. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. I know, Jack said. Don't do it again, she said. He met her gaze. No, he said. I won't. A pause. Jack, she said, does Okafor know about the water rights? I told her this morning. And she said it establishes motive at a level that materially strengthens the criminal case. Kane wasn't just running a coercion operation. He was trying to secure a specific regulatory asset through criminal means, including, if what we believe about the device in the booth is correct, attempted homicide. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Homicide. They had been circling it. They had used words like precision operation and specific method, and more than a tracking device. But the word itself had not been said plainly before. He tried to kill you, Emily said. Yes, Jack said quietly. In the county investigation. Garland, the storage unit, my testimony, all of it traces back to that night in the diner. All of it. Which traces back to me saying 3 words. Jack looked at her. Yes, he said, all of it. Emily sat with the full weight of that, not with pride that wasn't the right word, with something more complex. The weight of small decisions that turn out to have long shadows. The way a moment that lasted 10 seconds of choice, made in the reflection of a chrome coffee maker, a whisper across a counter, could reach forward into everything that came after and rearrange it. Victor Kane is going to lose everything, she said, not triumphantly, just as a statement of fact. If the case holds, Jack said carefully, the case holds, she said, I'm going to make sure it holds. Again, Robert Garland was arrested at 9:17 that evening. Webb sent Marcus a text, which Marcus forwarded to Emily's phone with no commentary. Just the timestamp and 2 words, done, clean. She was sitting on Margaret's porch when she got it. Roosevelt was in her lap again. The October air was cold and clean and smelled like the mountains the way it always did at night in Red Creek. She sat with the text for a while. She thought about Garland in a room somewhere, facing what 11 years of choices had built. She did not feel satisfaction exactly. She felt something more sober, the recognition that the thing most likely to destroy a community was rarely the outside force. It was the person inside who let the door open. She called Jack. He answered on the first ring. I know, he said. Yeah, she said. A pause. How are you, he asked. It was the first time he had asked her that without it being an assessment of whether she was in immediate danger. She noticed that. I'm tired, she said honestly, and I'm something else that I don't have the right word for. Tell me what it feels like. She thought about it. Like standing up after you've been sitting on the floor for a long time, she said. Your legs they're not completely reliable yet, but you're standing. A quiet from his end. Then yeah, he said, I know that feeling. She believed him. Tomorrow, she said. What happens tomorrow? Okafor is holding a press conference at 10 on, he said. The federal and state charges against Kane are being formally announced. The county official's arrest will be part of the announcement. And me? Your name it'll come out, he said carefully, in the context of the warrant. The press will know you were the originating witness. Emily closed her eyes, not from fear, from the particular exhaustion of knowing that tomorrow the invisible would become visible in a way that could not be undone. Okay, she said. Emily? Yeah. You don't have to go to the press conference. Okafor says your presence is not required. You can... I'll be there, she said, a pause. I figured, Jack said. She arrived at the county building at 9:45 the next morning and stood in the back while Okafor set up at a podium that had been positioned in front of the main entrance. There were cameras already, local news she recognized, a reporter from the Denver paper, A woman with a recorder who Webb had told her was from the AP. Carol Spence was there. She had come without being asked, standing near the front with her arms crossed and an expression of composed determination that Emily recognized because she had seen it in the back room of a hardware store between shelves of pipe fittings. Gene Russo was there, hands in his pockets, jaw set. Teresa from the bakery was there, standing beside a man Emily didn't recognize, who turned out Carol told her quietly to be the property attorney from Fort Collins. The 7 business owners who had not sold. All 7 of them, standing together. She had not organized this. She had not asked anyone to come. They had called each other, she understood, through the network of calls and conversations that had started when she had moved between them like a thread, and they had decided together to be present at the moment when the thing that had been done to them was named publicly. She looked at them and felt something move through her chest that was enormous and had no clean name. Jack appeared beside her. She hadn't heard him approach, which she was starting to think was simply a skill he possessed. "You did that," he said quietly, nodding toward the group. "They did that," she said, "because of you." She didn't answer. Okafor stepped to the podium. She spoke for 18 minutes. She named Victor Kane. She described the scope of the operation: 4 states, 11 years. Dozens of businesses, a county official whose access had been weaponized against the community he was paid to serve. She described the evidence recovered from the storage unit. She described the charges: racketeering, coercion, criminal intimidation, attempted murder. The reporters were writing fast. Okafor said this investigation was initiated as a result of a single witness who came forward with information observed during a routine working shift. That witness's courage and clarity of observation provided the foundation for everything that followed. She did not say Emily's name at the podium, but in the transcript of the warrant application that would be released to the press that afternoon, the name Emily Carter appeared in the first paragraph. By 2 o'clock, Emily's phone was ringing with numbers she didn't recognize. She didn't answer them. She sat in Margaret's kitchen with Carol Spence and Gene Russo and Teresa from the bakery, and they drank coffee around Margaret's table. And Gene said at one point, apropos of nothing, "I want to call Harold Briggs in Wyoming, the man who lost his diner." The table went quiet. "Why?" Teresa asked. "Because he deserves to know," Gene said, "that it's over, that someone finally stopped it." He looked at Emily. "He deserves to know her name." Emily looked at the table. She thought about a man she had never met, 67 years old, 40 years of his life, ground down by a machine that had been running unchecked for 11 years. She thought about whether it would comfort him or break him open fresh, knowing it was over. She thought about what she would want if she were him. She thought she would want to know. She thought she would want someone to call and say it was real. What happened to you was real, and someone saw it and said something. "Give me his number," she said. "I'll call him." She looked at her. "You sure?" "Yes." He found the number on his phone. It had been in the folder she recalled in Jack's methodical documentation, and he slid his phone across the table to her. Emily picked it up. She dialed. It rang 3 times. An older man's voice, careful and worn. "Hello, Mr. Briggs," she said. "My name is Emily Carter. I'm a waitress in Red Creek, Colorado. I don't know if you've heard the news today, but I wanted to make sure you heard it from a person instead of from a screen." She paused. "Victor Kane was charged this morning. Federal charges. What happened to you, it's all part of it. The case is real and it's solid, and he is not going to be able to do to anyone else what he did to you." A long silence. She waited. Then Harold Briggs said in a voice that was doing its level best to hold itself together, "Who did you say you were?" "Emily Carter," she said. "I'm a night shift waitress. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, and I said something about it, and one thing led to another." Another silence. "Why are you calling me?" he asked. "Because," she said, and her voice was steady and true, "someone told me that you deserve to know. And because someone should have called you a long time ago and didn't. And I know what that's like." Harold Briggs was quiet for a very long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, scraped clean the way voices get when the thing you have been carrying for years is suddenly unexpectedly lifted. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome, Mr. Briggs," she said. She hung up. The kitchen was very quiet. Carol had her hand over her mouth. Jean was looking at the table. Teresa was blinking. Emily set the phone down. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. She thought about 3 words whispered over a counter at 2:17 in the morning. About the small, specific courage of saying the thing you see when staying quiet would be so much easier. About how courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision that something else, someone else mattered more than the fear. She thought about Jack Holloway, who was probably at that exact moment somewhere in Red Creek doing something careful and methodical to make sure the next few weeks went the way they needed to go, and who had looked at her across that counter 9 days ago and seen something nobody else had bothered to look for. She thought about Margaret, whose house she was sitting in, who had written a note on a kitchen table for a stranger and put enough warmth into it to matter. She thought about Roosevelt currently making a calculated bid for Jean Rousseau's lap. She thought about the network of people now connected to each other who had been isolated and afraid a week ago. She thought about Harold Brigging in Wyoming with a phone in his hand. She thought about the specific accumulating weight of showing up even when you were afraid, even when you were invisible, even when the room was quiet and the coffee was burning and the night shift stretched out endlessly in front of you, and it would be so much easier to stay behind the counter and pretend you hadn't seen what you'd seen. She thought about all of it, and then she got up and refilled everyone's coffee because that was what she did, and some things didn't change, and she was glad for the ones that didn't. 3 weeks after the press conference, Victor Kane's attorneys filed for a continuance and were denied. Emily heard about it from Okafor, who called her on a Tuesday morning while she was back behind the counter at the road stop refilling Pete's coffee. She stepped into the back hallway and listened, and when Okafor said denied in that precise measured voice, Emily felt something release in her chest that she hadn't realized she was still holding. "What does that mean for the timeline?" Emily asked. "It means he can't stall anymore," Okafor said. "The preliminary hearing is confirmed. Your testimony stands as filed. Kane's team requested exclusion of the warrant evidence on Fourth Amendment grounds. The judge rejected it in 40 minutes. She paused. "Emily, I've been doing this 19 years. A rejection in 40 minutes is a statement." Emily leaned against the hallway wall. "And Garland?" she asked. "Garland accepted a cooperation agreement this morning," Okafor said. "He's agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Everything he knows about Kane's operation across all 4 states, the contacts, the methods, the payments, it's all going on record." Emily closed her eyes. Robert Garland, who had sat in a county planning office for 11 years and sold his community piece by piece to a man named Victor Kane, was now going to dismantle that same machine from the inside. There was a specific justice in that, she thought. Not clean, not satisfying in any simple way, but real. "Thank you for calling me directly," Emily said. "You earned the direct call," Okafor said, and hung up. Emily stood in the back hallway for a moment. Then she went back to the counter and refilled Pete's coffee. Pete looked up from his phone, which almost never happened. "You okay?" he asked. She looked at him. Pete, who had been coming in for 3 years and had never asked her that question once. "Yeah," she said. "I'm good, Pete." He nodded and went back to his phone. She wiped down the counter and thought even that is something. Jack came into the diner 4 days later. Not at 2 in the morning, not in crisis, on a regular Saturday afternoon when the lunch crowd had thinned and Dale was in the back doing inventory, and the October sun was coming through the front windows at the angle it always did in the fall. He sat at the counter, same stool as before. I didn't say anything right away. He ordered coffee and Emily poured it, and they were quiet for a moment, the way 2 people are quiet when they've been through something together and the something has settled enough that they can exist in the same space without organizing it. Then Jack reached into his jacket and put something on the counter. Emily looked at it. It was a leather patch, small, rectangular, worn at the edges, not new, not ceremonial. The kind of thing that had been somewhere on a vest for years and carried the history of that in the way it looked. She didn't touch it. "What is that?" she asked. "It belonged to a man named Ray," Jack said. "He rode with us for 22 years. He died 4 years ago. Heart attack, nothing dramatic. I was the kind of man who showed up for people without being asked." He paused. "I've been carrying it in my jacket since his funeral." Emily looked at the patch. "Jack, it's not a membership patch," he said immediately. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not. It's not that." He looked at her directly. "It's a symbol of a specific thing." Ray had a phrase he used. He said the only people worth knowing are the ones who show up when showing up costs them something. He paused. "I can count on one hand the number of people I've met in 63 years who qualify. Ray was one of them." Emily looked at the patch on the counter. She thought about what it meant to be handed something that a man had carried for 4 years in memory of someone he loved. She thought about what it meant that Jack Holloway, who frightened most people in Red Creek without trying, and who had built a life around a specific kind of fierce, guarded loyalty, was sitting at a diner counter on a Saturday afternoon putting that thing in front of her. She picked it up. It was lighter than she expected, warm from being inside his jacket. "You saved my life," Jack said quietly. "I know you know that. I know you'd say you just did what anyone should have done. But I need you to understand something." He stopped, gathered himself in the particular way of a man for whom certain words required effort. "Nobody did. For 63 years, not a single stranger looked at a situation I was in and put themselves between me and it. Not once, until you." Emily held the patch in both hands. She thought about the 8-year-old girl who had needed someone to step in and hadn't had anyone. She thought about the neighbor at the window. She thought about 33 years of carrying that memory like a stone in her pocket and how it had shaped the woman she had become. The attention she paid, the instinct she had honed, the inability to stay behind the counter when she could see what was happening on the other side of it. She thought about how the hardest things we carry sometimes become the most important things we have to give. "I didn't do it for a reward," she said. "I know," Jack said. "That's the only reason it means anything to give you one." She looked at him. She set the patch gently on the counter and pushed it back toward him. He looked at her. "Keep it in your jacket," she said. "Where it's been. That's where it belongs." Jack looked at the patch. Then he looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not disappointment she saw, but something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of a person meeting someone whose values mirror their own in an unexpected place. "Okay," he said quietly. He picked it up and put it back in his pocket. A pause. "But I'm keeping my word," he said, "about showing up." She looked at him. "I know you are," she said. "I've been watching you do it." The thing nobody had told her about, the thing she hadn't expected, happened 6 weeks later. A fire broke out in the storage area behind the Roadstop Diner on a November Thursday. Not a big fire. No one was hurt. Dale got it under control with an extinguisher before the fire department arrived. But the storage area was gutted. 6 years of accumulated supply stock equipment, the old booth seating Dale had been meaning to get rid of and never had. The fire investigator's report said electrical fault. Emily believed it. She believed it because the note leaving and the pressure had stopped completely the week after Kane's cooperation deal with federal prosecutors was announced, and because the 3 men from the booth had been identified and arrested in Denver 2 weeks prior, and because there was no operational reason for anyone connected to Kane to bother with her anymore. It was just a fire. But it meant the diner needed work, and work meant money. Dale didn't have, and Emily stood in the parking lot the morning after looking at the black-edged wall of the storage area and felt the specific exhaustion of something bad happening at the exact moment when you had let yourself believe the worst was over. She called Jack. She didn't call him for help. She called him because she needed to say it out loud to someone who would understand the weight of small disasters without inflating them. "The storage area burned," she said when he answered. A pause. "Anyone hurt?" "No, just the stuff." She looked at the wall. $12,000 of damage, Dale says. His insurance has a $15,000 deductible. A quiet on the other end. "I'll call you back," Jack said. She looked at the phone after he hung up. She thought I didn't call him for help. She thought, but he heard it anyway. They showed up on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later. Not just Jack and Marcus. Not just the red-haired man whose name she'd finally learned was Danny. 11 people arrived in the Roadstop parking lot at 7 in the morning with trucks and tools and materials, and the particular organized efficiency of people who had done physical work together before and didn't need to be told how to coordinate it. Dale stood in the parking lot with his coffee mug in both hands and stared. "What is this?" he said. "People showing up," Emily said. Carol Spence arrived at 8 with Jean Russo and Teresa from the bakery, and 3 people Emily didn't know, but who turned out to be friends of Jean's who had heard about the diner and come anyway. The property attorney from Fort Collins had driven up himself, which struck Emily as extraordinary, until Carol told her that Teresa had made him a week's worth of free pastries. By 10 in the morning, there were 23 people working on the back of the Red Creek Road stop. Emily moved between them. She made coffee. She brought it out on trays. She learned names she hadn't known. She talked to a man named Phil who had driven 40 minutes because his wife's cousin knew Carol Spence. She talked to a woman named June who had heard about the case on the news and had come because, she said simply, it seemed like the right place to be. At one point, she stopped in the middle of the parking lot and just stood there for a moment holding an empty coffee tray, looking at 23 people working on a building she'd spent 3 years treating as a place she had to be rather than a place that mattered. Jack appeared beside her, and he had sawdust on his jacket. "You okay?" he asked. She thought about Pete asking her the same question across the counter and how surprised she'd been. "I'm trying to figure out what this feels like," she said. "What does it feel like?" She looked at the people, at Carol and Jean and Teresa, at Marcus, who was explaining something to Dale with the focused patience of a man who had a very precise idea of how a thing should be built, at Danny on a ladder who caught her looking and gave a small nod. "It feels like something I didn't know I was missing," she said, "until it was here." Jack was quiet beside her. "That's what belonging feels like," he said. She looked at him. She had spent 41 years being the woman at the edge of things, the overnight shift, the back corner, the invisible woman who kept everything running and nobody thought to name. She had built a life that was safe in its smallness and protected in its invisibility and deeply, quietly, painfully alone. And then she had whispered 3 words to a stranger at 2:17 in the morning, and the whole careful structure had cracked open, and what had come pouring through the crack was this: 23 people in a parking lot, Carol's hand over hers, Harold Briggs' voice on a phone, a leather patch worn soft with years, a gray cat named Roosevelt, a note in spidery handwriting saying, "Don't be fooled by the cat." Connection, the kind that costs something, the kind that's real. "Jack," she said. "Yeah, thank you for walking into my diner." He looked at her for a moment. Then the closest thing to a full smile she had ever seen from him moved across his face. "Thank you," he said, for looking up when the door opened. Victor Kane pleaded guilty to federal racketeering and criminal coercion charges on a December morning 4.5 months after 3 men walked into the Red Creek road stop and didn't order food. Robert Garland received a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony that reopened investigations in Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah. The development plan for the east side of Red Creek was formally withdrawn. Jack Holloway's 9 acres stayed exactly where they were, water rights intact the way his father had intended. Harold Briggs called Emily on the day the guilty plea was announced. "I heard," he said. "I thought you might," she said. "I wanted to call you," he said, "not because you need to hear it, but because I need to say it." A pause, the kind that carries a lot of weight for being quiet. "You gave me something back. I didn't think I'd get it back." "What's that?" she asked. "The feeling," he said slowly, "that what happened to me mattered, that someone saw it." Emily stood at the road stop counter with the phone against her ear, and the coffee burning behind her, and Pete at his usual stool, and Dale in the back, and the morning coming through the front windows the way it always did. "It mattered," she said, "every bit of it. It all mattered." She hung up. She stood for a moment in the quiet of an ordinary morning. Then she straightened, picked up the coffee pot, and went back to work. Not because she had to be there, but because she chose to be. And there was all the difference in the world between those two things. And Emily Carter had finally, at 41 years old, learned to feel the difference in her bones. She was no longer the woman nobody saw coming. She was the woman who had shown up for a stranger, for a community, for herself, and in doing so had discovered the most important truth she would ever know: that courage is not the absence of fear, and belonging is not something you find, and invisible is not the same as powerless. It never was. It never had been. And the woman who had whispered 3 words over a coffee counter at 2:17 in the morning would spend the rest of her life knowing exactly what she was worth. 3 weeks after Sandra Okafor stood at that podium, Victor Kane was formally indicted on federal charges across 3 counts. Emily heard about it from Marcus, who called at 7 in the morning while she was back at the road stop for her first overnight shift since everything had started. She was behind the counter refilling the napkin holders when her phone buzzed and she stepped into the kitchen and took the call, and Marcus said 4 words: "Kane's been formally charged." And then he said nothing for a moment, because sometimes 4 words need space around them to land properly. Emily leaned against the kitchen wall and let them land. "All 3 counts?" she asked. "All 3, Marcus said. "Racketeering, criminal coercion, attempted homicide. The federal prosecutor is calling it one of the most thoroughly documented coercion operations they've seen in the Mountain West in 20 years. He paused. Okafor says the ledger alone is enough. Everything else is, she called it, overwhelming. Emily closed her eyes. She thought about the file she had read 3 times in Margaret's kitchen. She thought about the 17 communities in Harold Briggs in the Wyoming cases that had been quietly closed and now would be quietly reopened. She thought about Unit 14 of a storage facility registered to a shell company, full of the careful, meticulous documentation of 11 years of crimes, and about the fact that Victor Kane had kept it all in one place because he had never once believed anyone would find it. Because the people he operated against were supposed to be too small to look. Robert Garland, she asked, pled out yesterday, Marcus said. He'll cooperate fully with the federal case in exchange for a reduced sentence. Everything he knows about Kane's operation, the local contacts, the advisory network, the payment structure, all of it's on the table. Good, Emily said. She was surprised by how uncomplicated the word felt. Not vengeful, just clean. She went back to the counter and finished refilling the napkin holders and served the 2 truckers who had come in during her phone call, and she moved through the familiar motions of the job with a steadiness in her hands that had not been there 3 weeks ago. Dale appeared from the back office around 8, which was unusual for him. He stood at the end of the counter and looked at her with the expression of a man who had a lot of things to say and was trying to figure out the order. He said. Dale, you know I'm not good at, he stopped, started again. When Jack Holloway called me 3 weeks ago and told me there was a situation. He rubbed the back of his neck. I want you to know I've known you for 3 years and I never once, another stop. Emily looked at him. You never once what? She said gently. I never once understood what I had, he said, right here, working this counter. He met her eyes. I'm sorry about that. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about 3 years of being invisible, about coming in when Dale called and leaving when the shift ended, and being reliable and present and competent in the particular way of people who have learned that reliability is the only leverage they have. You treated me decently, she said. You always treated me decently. Decently isn't the same as seeing someone, Dale said. She looked at him. No, she said, it isn't. A pause. I'm giving you a raise, he said, and I want you to know the schedule is yours to set. Whatever shifts you want, whatever you need. Emily thought about saying it wasn't necessary. The old reflex, the invisible woman's reflex, the one that deflected recognition before it could be taken away again. She pressed it down. Thank you, Dale, she said. He nodded, relieved. He went back to the office. Emily turned back to the counter. And then the door opened, and Jack Holloway walked through it. I didn't come alone. She heard them before she saw the full picture. The sound of more than one set of boots on the diner floor. The particular quality of a room that changes when it takes in more people than it expects. She turned from the coffee maker and counted 12 men, some of whom she recognized from the night the situation had unfolded, and some she had never seen, all of them wearing the leather vest with the Hells Angels patches, and all of them moving in the particular quiet way of people who were here for something specific. They filled the diner. The 2 truckers at the end of the counter looked up, assessed the situation, and decided to become very interested in their eggs. Jack came to the counter. He looked different from the man who had walked through this door 3 weeks ago. Not less tired, not younger, but lighter, somehow. Like something that had been sitting on him for months had been shifted. You're working, he said. Always, she said. Coffee, please. She poured 12 cups without being asked and started carrying them out. A few of the men thanked her quietly. One of them, a young man she had seen outside Margaret's house on one of the watch nights, looked at her with the specific expression of someone who had been told something about her and was adjusting his understanding now that he was in the same room with her. She went back to Jack. He had something in his hand. She hadn't noticed it when he came in. It was small enough that he'd been holding it loosely, not presenting it. He set it on the counter between them. It was a patch. Leather worn at the edges, the kind of worn that comes from years of real use. She recognized the Hells Angels insignia, but this one was different from the standard club patches she had seen on the vests around the room. It was older, more personal. She looked at it and then at Jack. This was my father's, he said. He was the one who filed the water rights in '87. He built what I've been protecting. He paused. He was the kind of man who believed that what you protect says more about you than what you build. Emily didn't say anything. I'm not offering you membership, Jack said, and something at the edge of his mouth moved in a way that was the closest she had seen him come to a real smile. I want to be clear about that before you panic. I wasn't panicking, she said. You had a look. I didn't have a look. Emily, you had a look. She almost laughed. Almost. What is it then? She asked quietly. It's a symbol of respect, he said, from me and from everyone in this room. It means that what you did mattered. It means that you are not someone we forget. He paused. It means that when you need something you call, not because we owe you, because that's how this works. That's how it should work between people. She looked at the patch on the counter. She thought about the first night, about whispering don't sit down to a man she didn't know, about standing in her hallway with a key in her hand and a cold apartment behind her, about Margaret's kitchen and the note about the cat and the cornbread in the folder and Carol Spence's hand over hers and Harold Briggs's scraped clean voice on the phone. She thought about all the things that had come from 3 words. She reached out and picked up the patch. It was heavier than it looked. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Jack said. You earned it. One of the men at the back of the diner, the big one she'd come to know as T, who had stood watch outside Margaret's house 2 nights in a row, began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, the kind of applause that isn't about noise but about weight. The others joined it, 12 men in a highway diner at 8 in the morning, clapping for a waitress with bad knees and a braid in her hair and a patch in her hand. Dale appeared at the kitchen doorway. He looked at the scene. He went back into his office, and she heard him blow his nose loudly, which she was going to choose to believe had nothing to do with the moment. She stood behind the counter and held the patch and let herself be seen. The twist nobody in Red Creek saw coming arrived 6 days later. Harold Briggs called her, not her Jack's number, which somehow Harold had tracked down through a chain of calls she never fully reconstructed. Jack texted her immediately, "That man from Wyoming is trying to reach you." She called Harold Briggs back within the hour. "Ms. Carter," he said. His voice was different from the first call, not raw anymore. Purposeful. "I've been doing some thinking since we spoke." "Mr. Briggs," she said, "how are you?" I'm better than I've been in 3 years," he said. "Because of what you told me? Because of knowing it's over." A pause. "I want to do something. I want to come to Red Creek." Emily stopped. "You want to come here," she said. "I want to meet the people who stopped him," Harold said. "I want to sit in that diner you work at. I've been sitting in Wyoming for 3 years feeling like nobody in the world knew what happened to me. And now people know, and I need to be in the room with that. Does that make sense?" Emily's throat tightened. "It makes complete sense," she said. "I also want to talk to your federal attorney," he said, "about the Wyoming case, about reopening it. Because I'm 71 years old and I'm not going to spend whatever's left of my life being the man who let Victor Kane win without fighting back." Something in her chest cracked open quietly. "I'll call Okafor today," Emily said. "There's one more thing," Harold said, and his voice shifted again, quieter, private. "I want to know how you did it. I want to know how you saw those men for what they were when everybody else would have looked away. I want to understand that because I've been trying to figure out what I could have done differently, and I think it starts there, with someone choosing to look." Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about how to answer that honestly. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "I didn't do anything remarkable. I paid attention because I learned a long time ago that paying attention was how you survived. And I said something because I learned the hard way and too late in some situations that staying quiet has a cost. Not just for you, for the person you stayed quiet about." She paused. "I think the only difference between me and everyone else that night was that I didn't talk myself out of what I saw." A long silence. "Most people do," Harold said. "Most people do," she agreed. "I'll be there Thursday," he said. "I'll make sure there's good coffee," she said. Harold Briggs laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that hadn't had much occasion to come out in 3 years. And Emily held the phone and listened to it and thought that of all the things that had happened in the last 4 weeks, this sound was among the most important. Harold arrived on a Thursday afternoon. He was smaller than she had imagined, compact, white-haired, with the careful walk of a man whose knees had been talking back to him for a decade, which was something Emily understood personally. He came through the road stop's door and stopped and looked around the diner the way people look at places that mean something, And then he looked at her behind the counter, and his face did something complicated. She came around the counter and shook his hand. He held it with both of his the way Jean Russo had done, and then he said, "You look like someone who works hard." "I do work hard," she said. "Good," he said. "Hard workers are the ones who notice things. Soft people spend all their time looking at themselves." He sat down at the counter. "I'll take that coffee now." She poured it. He looked at the diner around him. 42 years mine and was open," he said. "Not 40. I've been shortchanging myself." He shook his head. 42 years, and I let one man make me feel like it meant nothing." "He made you feel that way," Emily said carefully. "He didn't make it true." Harold looked at her. "Okafor called me yesterday," he said. "The Wyoming case is reopening. Based on the ledger in the federal case, the statute of limitations issue is being addressed through a civil fraud claim that doesn't have the same ceiling." He paused. "She thinks I can recover damages. Real damages." Another pause. "She said it was your testimony that cracked the ledger open, that without your warrant, none of it existed." Emily poured her own coffee and came around to sit on the stool beside him. "It existed," she said. "Kane kept the records. The ledger existed. It was just waiting for someone to find it." "It was waiting for you," Harold said, simply, directly. The way old people sometimes say things that younger people spend too much energy decorating. She didn't argue. They sat together in the Roadstop diner on a Thursday afternoon. Two people with bad knees and hard work hands, drinking coffee that wasn't great but was hot and outside. The highway ran past and the mountains sat where they always sat, and Red Creek was still standing, not because it was big or powerful or because anyone important had decided to protect it, but because one woman had whispered 3 words and refused to take them back. Jack came by that evening after Harold had gone to his motel, and the diner had thinned to the usual late crowd. He came alone this time. He sat at the counter and she poured him coffee without asking, and he wrapped his hands around the mug the way he always did. And for a while, neither of them said anything because some things are better held in quiet for a moment before words are put to them. Then he said, "Okafor called me today." Emily looked at him. "Kane's attorneys reached out," he said. "They want to discuss a settlement, a civil settlement outside the criminal case, which means he's trying to buy his way out of the parts he can buy his way out of." "Can he?" "The criminal case is federal," Jack said. "He can't settle that, but the civil claims from the affected businesses, if he settles those, it reduces the financial pressure on him in ways his lawyers think will help." He paused. "He's offering significant amounts to the Red Creek business owners and to the Wyoming and New Mexico cases." Emily looked at him steadily. "And the business owners?" "Carol called me this afternoon," Jack said. "She said, and I'm quoting directly, 'I'd rather have a trial than a check if it means he answers for it publicly.'" He paused. "Jean said the same thing. Teresa said she'd take the money if it went to Harold Briggs." Emily set her coffee down. "What did you tell Okafor?" "I told her the criminal case proceeds regardless," Jack said. "The civil settlement is the business owner's choice, not mine. But I told her one other thing." He looked at her directly. "I told her that the one person Kane's settlement offer does not reach is the person who made all of this possible. That Emily Carter is not a line item in a settlement negotiation. That if Kane wants to make something right, he starts by acknowledging publicly in court, on the record, that a waitress in Red Creek, Colorado caught what his operation was doing and had the integrity to say so." Emily looked at him. She didn't speak for a moment. "He'll never agree to that," she said. "I know," Jack said. "Which is fine. It means the trial proceeds. And in the trial, everything is on the record, including you, including what you did and why." He held her gaze. "You won't be invisible in this, Emily. Whatever else happens, you will not be invisible." She felt it move through her, the old reflex trying to deflect it, the old habit of making herself smaller. So there was less to lose. She felt it rise, and she let it pass. "Good," she said. 2 months later, Victor Kane stood before a federal judge and heard the word guilty read into the record on all 3 counts. Emily was not in the courtroom. She had given her testimony by video deposition, clear and steady, and exactly as precise as it had been in Margaret's kitchen on the night she had read a folder 3 times with a cat in her lap. Okafor told her afterward that Kane's attorneys had tried 4 times to destabilize her during cross-examination, and had failed 4 times because you cannot destabilize a woman who has nothing left to prove and nothing left to hide. She heard the verdict from Okafor's call, standing in the road stop parking lot on a cold November morning before her shift started. She stood in the parking lot and looked at the highway and the mountains beyond it and let the word land guilty. She called Harold Briggs. He picked up on the second ring. "I heard," he said. His voice was the steady voice of a man who had put something down and was not planning to pick it up again. "You heard?" "I just heard," she said. "Good," he said. "Good," she said. A pause, and then Harold said, "You know what I've been thinking about?" "What?" "I've been thinking I might open another diner," he said. Emily smiled. "A real one, the kind that takes you by surprise." "Yeah," she said. "Nothing as big as the old one," Harold said. "Something small, manageable. My granddaughter wants to help. She's 23 and thinks she knows everything about coffee." He paused. "She probably does. They all do at that age." He was quiet a moment. I think I have some time left. And I don't want to end it being someone that Victor Kane defeated." "You were never defeated," Emily said. "I know that now," Harold said. "That's the difference." She stood in the parking lot after the call ended and thought about time. About the specific currency of it, how you could spend years and years in a kind of invisible stillness, and then 3 words could crack it open, and you could find in the rubble of what you thought your life was something that had been there the whole time, something real and worth protecting. She went inside and tied on her apron. Dale was already at the office. The coffee was already burning. The highway was already moving outside, the windows, trucks and cars and people going from one place to another, all of them carrying their own invisible weights, all of them hoping in the particular and unspoken way of people who keep moving through hard lives that someone in the next place would see them when they arrived. That night, Jack came in for the last time that week. He sat at the counter. She poured his coffee. He left a decent tip. Before he left, he paused at the door. "You doing all right?" he asked, the way he had started asking it, not assessing, not protective, just asking. "Yeah," she said, "I am." He nodded. "Red Creek's lucky," he said. "Red Creek's stubborn," she said. "There's a difference." He almost smiled, the closest version he had. "Maybe both," he said. He walked out the door into the Colorado night, and Emily turned back to the counter. And she was not invisible anymore. Not to herself, not to this town, not to the 7 business owners who called her by name. Now not to Harold Briggs in Wyoming, who was maybe opening something small with his granddaughter, who knew everything about coffee, not to a federal record that would carry her name as the woman who saw what no one else bothered to look at. She was not invisible. She had chosen at 2:17 in the morning with shaking hands in a chrome coffee maker and 3 words she could not take back to stop being invisible. And the world imperfect and complicated and full of people who sometimes showed up and sometimes didn't had shown up for her in return. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And it was more than enough.